On a bright winter morning, an abandoned railway signal began flashing a message no one expected to receive. Reed Mallory followed it into the mountains, only to find the daughter he had not seen in 3 years. At Red Hollow Station, 3 German shepherds had already begun changing the life he tried to keep frozen in the past. But when a real emergency trapped 12 adults beneath the snow, Reed could no longer solve everything alone. One dog had to face a dark tunnel, while Reed faced the harder choice of trusting others and admitting his own limits. What followed was not the victory of one hero, but a rescue built from courage, patience, and many willing hands. Tell us where you're watching from, or share your thoughts after the story. And please like and subscribe to help SEAL K9 Heroes reach 1,000 subscribers. Chapter 1. The Signal That Should Not Have Appeared. By the last morning of February, the storm had finally exhausted itself. Larkspur Basin emerged beneath a pale blue sky, so clear that the mountains seemed closer than they were. Snow rested on the pine branches in thick white folds. Sunlight ran across the frozen roofs, the empty access road, and the abandoned rails beyond Red Hollow Station, turning the twin strips of steel into bright lines through a field of glass. Reed Mallory stood at the kitchen window with a chipped mug warming both hands. At 58, he still carried the broad shoulders and solid frame of a man accustomed to lifting signal housings, clearing frozen switches, and walking mountain grades with tools strapped to his back. Time had not softened him so much as tightened certain places. His face was long, weathered by cold, with deep lines beside his mouth and brown-gray eyes that seemed to listen before they looked. Dark, ash-brown hair swept back from his forehead, silver showing clearly at both temples. He wore an olive-drab work shirt close across his chest, its camouflage sleeves rolled below the elbows, and charcoal work pants marked with sawdust from the previous evening. A brass signal key hung from his belt, though there was nothing left at Red Hollow that officially required one. Behind him, the station had already begun its morning rituals. Kepler sat beside the front window, long-legged and alert, watching a rabbit's tracks cross the buried platform. His black saddle coat caught the sunlight, and the tip of his right ear leaned slightly outward, as if one thought had distracted it from standing straight. Maisie slept near Reed's chair with her chin on one paw. She was smaller and warmer in color than Kepler, with a dark, teardrop-shaped mark beneath her left eye. Every few breaths, one ear turned toward Reed without the rest of her body moving. Tuck lay under the old telegraph desk. He was the smallest of the 3, broad through the chest, with 2 tan marks above his eyes that gave him a permanently serious expression. He preferred enclosed spaces, provided nothing metallic rang too loudly inside them. Nearly a year had passed since Reed found them. They were no longer the half-frozen animals who had huddled beneath an oilcloth tarp in a derailed maintenance car. Their coats had filled out. Their paws no longer looked too large for their bodies. Yet each had kept something from that first winter. Kepler still checked every exit before settling down. Maisie still woke when Reed's breathing changed. Tuck still placed himself between unfamiliar footsteps and the other 2. Reed had built 3 wooden beds against the far wall, each raised above the cold floor and fitted precisely to its owner. He had repaired the fence behind the station, stocked enough food to last through April, and added their names to the emergency contact sheet beside the telephone. Whenever Owen Carver or Dr. Corinne Vale pointed out that these were not temporary arrangements, Reed replied that lumber could always be reused. No one argued anymore. The old signal board moved behind him. It began with a dry metallic click. Reed turned before the first amber lamp came on. The board occupied most of the wall beside the former station office. Its painted labels had faded to dull gray, and several glass indicators had been removed years earlier. Official power to the Red Hollow line had been disconnected long before Reed moved into the station. The outdoor signal towers were now little more than rusting frames under coats of ice, but some of the maintenance shelters farther up the mountain still contained hand-cranked generators. Copper communication wire remained buried beneath portions of the old trackbed. Reed knew because he had tested several sections himself after buying the station, though he had never admitted that to the county. The amber light flashed again. Long, short, then a pause. Reed set the mug down. Kepler left the window immediately. Maisie raised her head. The sequence repeated. A worker trapped at North Relay Station. Reed had not seen that code in 9 years. For several seconds, the station seemed to lose all ordinary sound. The wood stove continued to settle. Meltwater tapped from the eaves. Somewhere beneath the floor, an old heating pipe expanded with a faint knock. But Reed heard only the rhythm of the signal. Long, short. There were codes the hands remembered after the mind had tried to bury them. He could still picture them written in white chalk on a black training board. He could still hear Philip Danner beside him, complaining that the old railway had created 5 separate signals for trouble and none for a decent cup of coffee. Reed crossed the room and opened the metal cabinet beneath the board. The emergency telephone showed no line. His mobile phone displayed 1 weak bar, then none. He reached for the county radio mounted beside the cabinet, but stopped with his hand on the microphone. Calling it in would take time. Questions would come first. Who had activated the system? Was the code reliable? Had anyone confirmed conditions at North Relay? Dana Creel's rescue unit would need to assemble, check avalanche reports, and establish a command point. All of that was correct. All of it felt too slow. Reed took his canvas railway coat from the hook. Kepler moved toward the door. "No," Reed said. Kepler stopped, looking up at him. Reed looked through the window at the slope north of the station. The sky was bright. The storm had passed. The access track would be buried, but the maintenance road below it might still be usable. The signal flashed again. Maisie stood and stepped directly in front of Reed. He shifted left. She moved with him. Not now. Maisie touched her nose to the small medication pouch clipped beneath his coat, then looked at his face. Reed could feel the unevenness she had noticed. Not pain, only a skipped beat followed by the familiar pressure of his body correcting itself. He placed one hand against her shoulder and guided her aside. "I'm fine." Maisie did not believe him. Neither did Reed. Tuck came out from beneath the desk and stood behind her. He did not bark at first. He watched Reed fasten his coat, pull on gloves, and take the old tool bag from the cabinet. Only when Reed opened the door did Tuck give one short, low warning. The sound followed Reed into the cold. He loaded Kepler into the passenger side of the truck, left Maisie and Tuck inside the fenced station yard, and pulled away before he could reconsider the radio. The maintenance road climbed through snow-laden timber, its edges difficult to distinguish beneath the morning glare. Reed drove slowly, one hand steady on the wheel while the other rested near the gearshift. Kepler stood with his front paws braced against the floor and looked through the windshield. Nothing about the mountain appeared distressed. That made Reed trust it less. Bright winter mornings often fooled people. They mistook visibility for safety, silence for stability. The storm had added weight to the slopes. Wind had moved snow into places where it did not belong. Cold had hardened the surface without strengthening what lay beneath. Reed had once known every mile of this route. He had once believed knowing a place meant it could no longer surprise him. North Relay Station appeared after the next bend, a low concrete shelter built into the hillside. Fresh tire tracks crossed the snow outside it. Too many tracks. Reed stopped the truck at an angle and stepped out before the engine had fully settled. Kepler followed, nose working in the clean air. There were no cries for help, no damaged vehicle, no figure waving from the doorway. Instead, 3 people in reflective winter gear stood beside an open signal cabinet. A portable case of testing equipment rested on the snow. One technician held a coil of cable. Another was studying a meter. And beside the hand-cranked generator stood a woman Reed had not seen in almost 3 years. Avery Mallory wore a slate blue technical jacket with graphite panels at the shoulders and elbows. Her chestnut hair had been tied low at the back, though several loose strands had escaped beneath a burgundy knit cap. She had her mother's green-brown eyes and Reed's habit of going completely still when anger arrived. Her hand remained on the generator handle. For one irrational moment, Reed wondered whether the mountain had made her from memory. Then she looked at his truck, the tool bag in his hand, and Kepler standing at his side. "You came up here alone." It was not a greeting. Reed looked at the open cabinet. "You sent a trapped worker code." "We sent a system test." The board at Red Hollow read trapped worker. A tall, narrow man stepped away from the equipment. His black hair was neatly parted, silver beginning at the sides, and rectangular glasses sat beneath clear, protective goggles. He carried a rigid, waterproof case in one hand. "Noah Beckett," he said, "State Rail Infrastructure Inspector." Reed knew the name from county paperwork. Noah looked from Reed to Avery, clearly understanding that introductions were not the central problem. "The relay altered the pulse spacing," Noah continued. "Corrosion or cold contraction, possibly both. We were about to shut down the test. You might have started by telling the person living at the receiving station." Avery released the generator handle. "I sent 2 notices to the property address." "The property address is the station." "Yes, that is generally how addresses work." The answer had Helen's sharpness in it. Reed disliked how quickly he recognized that. Kepler walked toward Avery before Reed could call him back. The dog circled once, sniffed the lower edge of her jacket, then paused near her right hand. Avery's expression changed almost imperceptibly. She removed one glove and lowered her hand. Kepler sniffed her fingers, then leaned his head beneath her palm. "You kept them," she said. "They're being cared for." "That wasn't what I said." Reed looked toward the signal cabinet. Beside Avery's bare hand, the pale band where a wedding ring had once rested was clearly visible. Reed had known her marriage was strained. Owen had mentioned something months earlier, then stopped when Reed offered no response. Knowing was not the same as seeing. Avery followed his gaze and put her glove back on. Noah cleared his throat with the quiet precision of a man moving a meeting away from dangerous ground. Larkspur Basin has asked the state to evaluate whether portions of Red Hollow can serve as a backup emergency communication corridor. The county is considering hand-powered signal stations for the areas that lose radio and cellular service during winter storms. "And the alternative?" Reed asked. "Complete removal of the remaining equipment." The words settled differently than Reed expected. He looked beyond them at the old mast above the shelter. Ice clung to its ladder. The signal head had no lens. It had stood there for decades, useful, then obsolete, then merely tolerated. Avery folded her arms. "This morning demonstrated the problem," she said. an unreliable system can create an emergency instead of reporting one. It also transmitted across a line everyone said was dead, with the wrong message, which means the line needs repair or removal. Kepler stood between them, looking first at Avery, then Reed, as though waiting for one of them to choose a direction. Reed tightened his grip on the tool bag. His right hand trembled once, a small movement he tried to hide against the canvas handle. Avery saw it. He knew because her eyes dropped, then returned to his face without comment. For years, Reed had imagined their next meeting in several useless forms. In some versions, he apologized perfectly. In others, Avery understood without requiring him to explain. Sometimes Helen was still alive and stood between them, impatient with both. He had never imagined reflective jackets, a faulty relay, and Kepler pressing his shoulder against the daughter who had not come home. Noah closed the equipment case. "We'll need access to Red Hollow Station for the receiving board inspection." Reed looked at Avery. She did not ask permission. She did not look away. Behind them, the hand-cranked generator gave one final mechanical tick as its stored tension released. Far below, at the station Reed had left without calling anyone, an amber light might still have been fading behind the glass. The signal had been false. The distance it uncovered was not. Chapter 2. The Three Dogs in the Maintenance Car. Nearly a year earlier, Red Hollow Station had been quiet enough for Reed Mallory to hear snow collecting on the roof. Not falling, collecting. The storm pressed each new layer against the old shingles until the building answered with low wooden complaints. Wind swept along the abandoned trackbed and struck the western wall in long, steady pushes. Now and then, a loose signal cable tapped against the siding. Reed sat alone at the kitchen table, repairing the leather strap of an old tool bag that no longer needed repairing. Helen's chair remained on the opposite side. He had moved almost everything else after she died. Her medicine bottles were gone. The blankets from the months when she had always felt cold had been washed, folded, and placed in the upstairs cupboard. Avery had taken several boxes of photographs after the funeral, though Reed had not asked where she intended to keep them. The chair stayed. It was not a memorial. Reed disliked memorials that announced themselves. He simply had not found a practical reason to move it, and practicality had become the language he used when grief asked direct questions. The telephone rang shortly after 9. Reed let it ring twice before answering. "Tell me you're inside," Owen Carver said. Owen managed Larkspur Basin with the weary patience of a man who spent his days solving problems that technically belonged to someone else. His round, open face and short brown-gray mustache made him look more cheerful than he usually felt. Even over the telephone, Reed could picture him in his camel barn coat, a large ring of municipal keys knocking against his hip. "I'm inside." "Good. Stay there." "What happened?" A pause followed, brief but revealing. One of the forestry contractors heard metal striking rock west of mile marker 9. Could be loose equipment. Could be an old panel coming off a service shed. Could be nothing. It usually is when people say that. Reed looked toward the dark window. Snow moved sideways beyond the glass. The western grade hasn't been maintained. I am aware. The county truck won't clear the lower cut. I am also aware of that. Reed stood. Owen sighed into the receiver. "I called to tell you not to go." "No, you called because you knew I had the only truck fitted for that road." "That is an interpretation designed by a stubborn man." "Send me the contractor's location." "Reed, if metal is loose near the grade, it could cross the access road." Another pause. Then Owen gave him the coordinates. The storm had erased the road's edges by the time Reed reached the western cut. He drove by memory, watching the dark shapes of fence posts and the occasional rise of buried rail beside the truck. Headlights turned the snow into white streaks rushing toward the windshield. He found the maintenance car half a mile beyond mile marker 9. It had once been used to carry tools and replacement parts along the service line. A squat yellow car with narrow wheels and a small enclosed compartment. One side had slipped from the buried rails. The car leaned toward a drainage ditch, and a loose metal step struck a stone whenever the wind shifted it. Clang. Pause. Clang. Reed parked uphill and approached on foot, testing the snow with a shovel handle before each step. The car was empty at first glance. No fresh boot prints surrounded it. No engine tracks approached from either direction. Then something moved beneath an oilcloth tarp in the rear compartment. Reed stopped. The movement came again, followed by a sound so faint it might have been canvas rubbing against wood. He lifted the tarp. 3 German shepherd puppies lay beneath it, pressed together in a narrow hollow between 2 storage bins. They were old enough to have long legs and oversized paws, perhaps 5 months, but cold had made them seem smaller. The largest tried to raise his head. A black saddle covered most of his back, and one ear stood while the other tilted outward. Beside him, a warmer-colored female opened dark eyes and gave a soft breath through her nose. The 3rd puppy was lower and broader through the chest, with 2 tan marks above his eyes. He remained behind the others until Reed reached closer. Then the smallest one stepped forward. His legs shook, but he placed himself between Reed's hand and the other 2. "All right," Reed said quietly. "You've made your point." Each puppy wore a torn length of leather around the neck. There were no tags. The ends were ragged and stretched, not cleanly cut. Reed examined the compartment. A few tan hairs clung to the edge of the metal step. Melted snow had frozen again along the floor. The puppies had likely followed the rails before finding shelter in the car. He removed his canvas coat, wrapped all 3 inside it, and carried them to the truck. The smallest continued watching him from within the folds. At Red Hollow, Reed placed blankets near the wood stove, but not directly against it. He found towels, warmed water, and called Corinne Vale. She arrived 40 minutes later in a maroon quilted coat, her short silver hair flattened by a wool hood. Corinne had officially reduced her veterinary hours years ago, but everyone in Larkspur Basin knew retirement had failed to convince her. She set down a black medical case and looked at the 3 shapes on the blankets. "You said dogs," she told Reed. "They are dogs. You neglected the part where there were 3. They were young, and they were cold enough to reorganize my entire evening. You came anyway. That is not evidence in your favor." Her hands trembled slightly as she removed her gloves. The trembling disappeared when she touched the first puppy. Corinne worked without drama. She checked gums, paws, breathing, hydration, and body temperature. Reed followed instructions, warmed towels, and held each puppy as she examined them. The female protested weakly when Corinne touched one ear. "Good," Corinne said. "I prefer complaints." The long-legged male tried to return to the kitchen twice after Reed carried him into the hall, somehow locating the doorway despite the unfamiliar rooms. "That one remembers roots," Corinne observed. "He remembers food. Most useful intelligence begins there." The smallest puppy spent the examination under the table. Yet whenever Corinne moved toward the others too quickly, he came out and stood in front of them. By 2 in the morning, Corinne had stabilized all 3. "They need observation," she said, closing her medical case. "The animal shelter lost part of its roof this afternoon, so they cannot take them tonight." "One night," Reed replied. Corinne looked around the station. 3 bowls had already appeared near the sink. A folded blanket occupied Helen's chair. "One night," she repeated, without believing him. The next morning, the largest puppy found the kitchen after Reed carried him to the far end of the station and moved 2 crates across the hallway. Reed called him Kepler. The female followed Reed from room to room but settled whenever he sat down. On the second evening, he found himself humming while preparing food, a tune Helen had often played on an old radio while cooking. He stopped when he recognized it. The puppy lifted her head. "Maisie," Reed said. It had been the name in the song. The smallest dog remained beneath tables, benches, and the old telegraph desk whenever the station was quiet. Reed began calling him Tuck before deciding it was a name. 1 night became 4. 4 became 7. At the end of the first week, Corinne arrived with paperwork and did not take off her coat. "I found their owner." Reed had expected relief. Instead, his eyes moved toward the dogs. Kepler was asleep beside the stove. Maisie lay near Reed's boots. Tuck watched Corinne from beneath the desk. Corinne placed photographs on the table. In one, the 3 puppies stood outside a mountain livestock barn beside a thin woman with honey-brown eyes and loosely braided hair. A larger shepherd stood behind them. "Marla Quinn," Corinne said. She worked at the Bracken Ridge Ranch. Part of the barn came down during the storm. She was injured and taken out unconscious. The dogs. Volunteers moved the animals. These 3 were tied to a long leather lead. It snagged on broken metal and tore. Everyone assumed someone else had loaded them. Corinne showed him a photograph of the damaged lead. Its torn ends matched the pieces on the puppy's collars. "Where is she now?" Rehabilitation Center in Boise. The ranch terminated seasonal contracts after the damage. She has no home suitable for them. Reed looked at the photographs again. The mystery had not concealed cruelty or a calculated abandonment. It had been a chain of exhausted people making understandable assumptions in bad weather. That ordinary explanation unsettled him more than a dramatic one might have. Marla spoke to him by video call 2 days later. She sat beside a bright hospital window, one leg supported on a padded rest. Her face was thinner than in the photograph, but her voice remained steady. She asked specific questions. Whether Kepler still spun once before lying down, whether Maisie disliked cold water, whether Tuck still hid during loud noises. Reed answered each one. When he turned the screen toward the dogs, Tuck froze. Marla said his name softly. The puppy stepped from beneath the table, approached the telephone and touched his nose to the glass. Marla closed her eyes for a moment. "I can't take them back yet," she said. "Maybe not for a long time." Reed felt Maisie lean against his leg. "I can keep them until you can." The words left him before he had inspected them for consequences. Marla studied him through the screen. "Not until I can. Until we know what is right for them." It was a better promise, and therefore a harder one. He agreed. Elise Navarro arrived at Red Hollow in early spring to evaluate the dogs. She wore a faded green ranger jacket and carried an orange training lead coiled at her hip. Her dark hair, touched with silver, was tied short behind her neck. She watched the dogs for 10 minutes before asking Reed a single question. "What do you want them to become?" Reed looked toward Kepler, who was following a scent along the fence. "Useful. To whom?" The question irritated him because he did not have an answer. Elise tested them separately over several weeks. Kepler followed scent well until a deer crossed the training area. He abandoned the task with such enthusiasm that Elise stood with her hands on her hips, while Reed called him back through knee-deep mud. Maisie noticed changes in Reed's posture and breathing, but crowds made her restless. Tuck crossed a narrow plastic tunnel without hesitation, then refused to enter a metal culvert after a hammer struck somewhere nearby. "They have abilities," Reed said. "They have preferences, fears, and developing nervous systems," Elise replied. "Do not confuse possibility with permission." She continued coming anyway. So did other people. Owen brought cedar boards to repair the fence and stayed for stew. Corinne began using a spare room at her old clinic again because the dogs required regular checks. Miriam Galt, a retired meteorologist with white curls and a voice made for radio, delivered an old receiver so the puppies could become accustomed to static, dispatch chatter, and changing human voices. Red Hollow gradually filled with small interruptions. Boots appeared beside the door that did not belong to Reed. Coffee cooled on the table because conversations lasted longer than expected. The telephone rang and was answered. Some evenings, Reed discovered he had prepared enough food for more than one person without consciously deciding to. The dogs did not cure him. They inconvenienced his isolation until maintaining it became more work than letting people enter. Still, one door remained locked at the end of the station's eastern hall. Behind it were the Red Hollow incident files, Philip Danner's final inspection notes, several boxes of Helen's belongings, and the last birthday card Avery had sent before she stopped sending them. Kepler sometimes stopped outside that door and sniffed beneath it. Reed always called him away. He could open the station to weather, animals, neighbors, and noise, but not yet to that room. Chapter 3. The Map with Blank Spaces. The 30-day trial began with 6 folding tables, 4 extension cords, and an argument over who controlled the key to Red Hollow Station. Owen Carver believed Reed should keep it because Reed lived there. Noah Beckett believed the county should hold a duplicate because public equipment was about to be tested inside the building. Avery believed the lock should be replaced entirely. Reed stood beside the station office with his arms folded, while the 3 of them discussed his front door, as though he had already become part of the infrastructure. "You can all stop talking about the key," he said. "It opens when I turn it." "That is not an access policy," Avery replied. "No, it's a fact." Noah removed his glasses, cleaned them with a folded cloth, and waited for the disagreement to exhaust itself. Tall and narrow in a dark soft-shell jacket, he carried patience the way other inspectors carried measuring instruments, visibly and for professional use. The compromise gave Owen a sealed duplicate for emergencies. Reed signed the receipt without reading the line that described Red Hollow as a temporary operations site. The state had approved the trial under strict conditions. Noah would write the final report. Avery could conduct structural and communications assessments, but her findings required independent verification because her father occupied the station and had publicly argued for preserving the line. The county's emergency management office would control every test signal. No volunteer was permitted to begin a search because an old lamp blinked. Dana Creel made that rule clear during the first briefing. She stood at the end of the folding tables in a cobalt rescue jacket, one hand resting on a waterproof clipboard. Dana was compact and solidly built, with short ash-blonde hair and a low voice that discouraged interruption without ever rising. "This is not a resurrection," she told the room. "We are not bringing back the railroad. We are determining whether selected parts of an abandoned system can support modern emergency response." Owen lifted his mustard-colored thermos. "A modest resurrection," Dana looked at him. Owen lowered the thermos. For the next week, Red Hollow became less like a home and more like a machine being taken apart while still occupied. Technicians removed relay covers and laid their contents on padded cloth. Corroded wire ends were photographed, numbered, and sealed in clear bags. Test meters appeared on Reed's kitchen counter beside the coffee pot. Avery placed removable labels on cabinet doors. Noah compared every reading against archived maintenance records. 2 relay stations failed to respond at all. One generator produced enough current to signal, but not enough to maintain a stable pulse in deep cold. At another shelter, mice had filled a junction box with pine needles and insulation. The false emergency code from North Relay was reproduced on the 4th day. A contraction in an aging contact spring shortened the space between 2 pulses whenever the temperature fell below 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Avery wrote the result on her tablet. "Unreliable," she said. "Repairable," Reed answered. "Those are not opposites. People keep speaking as if they are." They could debate resistance levels, slope angles, and wire gauges for an entire morning. Their voices remained controlled. Their notes remained precise. Neither mentioned the 3 years Avery had stayed away. Their silence was most obvious when the subject came close to home. During one inspection, Avery found a handwritten contour map inside a drawer beneath the receiving board. Reed had marked wind channels, deep drift zones, and places where radio signals weakened against the mountain. A faded line in yellow grease pencil crossed the lower corner. A.M., first full-grade walk, age 16. Avery held the map without speaking. Reed remembered the day. She had worn boots 1 size too large and refused to admit her heels were blistered. Helen had met them at the station with soup and had laughed when Avery fell asleep at the kitchen table before finishing the first bowl. "You kept this?" Avery asked. "It was in the drawer." "That isn't an answer. It's where the maps belong." She turned the paper over as though another explanation might have been written on the back. There was none. Avery returned it to the drawer more carefully than she had found it. The conversation moved back to signal loss, but something in the room had shifted. Not softened. Simply become more difficult to pretend was absent. Outside, Elise Navarro conducted the dog's training on the snow-covered freight platform. She worked with one animal at a time. Kepler followed a scent trail laid between stacked timber and half-buried equipment, nose low and tail level. He found the cloth target twice. On the 3rd run, a mule deer crossed the tree line beyond the fence. Kepler lifted his head. His entire body changed direction before Elise touched the orange lead. "Kepler." The dog hesitated, glanced at her, then pulled toward the woods. Elise planted her boots and waited. Reed, watching from the platform steps, called the dog's name more sharply. Elise raised one hand without looking at him. Kepler reached the end of the lead, discovered that enthusiasm had not altered its length, and eventually returned. Elise rewarded the return, not the mistake. "He broke task," Reed said. "He came back. After chasing the wrong scent. He is 16 months old, not a machine. He knows better." Elise turned then. Her dark eyes were calm, which made the correction harder to dismiss. "He knows what we have taught under controlled conditions. He does not know what you hope he represents." Reed looked away first. Tuck's training moved from wide plastic tunnels to a short section of metal culvert set on level ground. He entered easily when the area was quiet. When one technician dropped a wrench against a steel toolbox nearby, the sound rang through the pipe. Tuck backed out at once and pressed himself against Elise's leg. Reed expected her to send him through again. Instead, she ended the session. Maisie's work took place inside the station. Elise had attached a soft pull cord to a battery-operated alert button near Reed's chair. When Reed imitated the posture he used during an irregular heartbeat, one hand tightening near his ribs, shoulders becoming unnaturally still, Maisie touched his wrist with her nose, guided him toward the chair, and pulled the cord. The first time she succeeded, Reed smiled before remembering anyone could see him. The second time, Maisie became distracted by Owen opening a package of biscuits in the kitchen. "Promising," Reed said. "Developing," Elise corrected. By the second week, the trial had produced more warnings than encouragement. Avery recommended removing 3 exterior towers immediately. Noah agreed on 2 and requested additional testing on the 3rd. Owen argued for preserving the shelter's nearest isolated homes. Dana asked practical questions no one could answer yet. Who would inspect the generators after storms? How often supplies would be replaced? And how false signals would be verified before a rescue team moved? Reed knew things the official records did not. He knew the North Slope carried sound farther after fresh snow. He knew fog collected beneath the eastern ridge even when the valley remained clear. He knew an old service spur passed within half a mile of 6 homes whose residents regularly lost cellular coverage. Yet memory was difficult to audit. Avery insisted that every claim be measured. Reed resented her for it, until the measurements proved him right more often than not. Then he resented how much that pleased him. On the 18th day, the survey team walked the eastern grade beneath a clean white sky. Kepler accompanied Elise on a controlled navigation exercise, while Tuck and Maisie remained with Corinne at the station. The official map showed the old line curving around the slope before crossing a shallow drainage channel. Snow had buried most landmarks, leaving only the tops of signal posts and a dark row of pines above the grade. Kepler stopped near a rounded mound several yards below the marked route. Elise called him forward. He followed, then circled back. The second time, he placed both front paws against the mound and sniffed along one edge. "Animal scent?" Avery asked. "Possibly," Elise said. "Or airflow." Reed studied the slope. The mound looked natural at first. Then he noticed the snow along its upper side had settled into a shallow crescent. Warm air, even a small amount, could change the way snow crust formed. "There used to be a ventilation stack somewhere along this cut," he said. Avery opened the digital map. "Nothing is recorded here. The paper survey from 1968 might show it. I checked that survey. You checked the revised copy." Avery looked at him. "And where is the original?" Reed pointed toward the ground. "Possibly under us." Dana halted the team until a snow technician tested the area. Once the surface was marked safe, they cleared the mound carefully. A circular metal grill appeared beneath nearly 3 feet of packed snow. The vent belonged to a maintenance corridor running into the hillside. Its exterior hatch stood farther downslope, hidden behind brush and ice. The hinges resisted until the technicians warmed them. When the door finally moved, cold air emerged carrying the dry mineral smell of old concrete. No one entered immediately. A camera was fed through first. The corridor remained open for most of its visible length, though ice blocked one branch. Rusted cabinets lined the wall. A manual generator sat beneath a canvas cover. A waterproof instruction board still hung beside a shelf of empty supply containers. Owen stared at the monitor. A shelter. An undocumented enclosed space, Avery said, with a generator. Of unknown condition. With room for stranded travelers. With one entrance partly hidden and another blocked by ice. Reed crouched beside the hatch. It connects to the service road. Avery studied the screen, which means someone could be directed here without the county knowing whether the roof is stable. The discovery should have settled the argument. Instead, it divided the truth into more pieces. The corridor could become an emergency shelter. It could also become a place where someone disappeared from official maps. Its generator might restore communication. Its wiring might send another false code. Every useful feature introduced a new responsibility. Noah ordered a structural assessment and closed the entrance with a temporary county seal. On the walk back, Avery carried the old map Reed had retrieved from a storage tube in the truck. The original survey showed the corridor in faint gray lines. A later revision had removed it after the branch was classified inactive. "You were right," she said. Reed stepped over a buried rail. "To write that down. I will write that the original documentation was incomplete. That's a longer way to say it. It's a more accurate way." Kepler walked between them, occasionally looking back as though checking that neither had fallen behind. Marla Quinn arrived at Red Hollow 2 days later. She came in a borrowed pickup and moved carefully when she stepped onto the packed snow. Her right leg remained stiff from the ranch accident. She wore a faded denim shirt beneath a rust-red coat, and her light brown hair, threaded with gray, had been braided loosely over one shoulder. Reed met her outside. "You could have called," he said. "I did." He remembered the telephone ringing while he was beneath the receiving board and chose not to defend himself. Tuck recognized her scent before she reached the gate. He came out of the station with Kepler and Maisie behind him, then stopped so abruptly that the other two nearly collided with him. Marla did not call his name again. She lowered herself onto the bench near the fence and waited. Tuck stood between her and the others. His ears shifted. His nose worked rapidly. For several long seconds, he seemed caught between two versions of safety. Then he crossed the yard. He did not leap into her arms. He placed his head carefully on her knee. Marla rested one hand between his ears. "That's enough," she whispered, though no one had asked anything from her. Kepler approached next, curious and open. Maisie remained beside Reed until he stepped forward, then followed. Inside, Marla explained that she had rented a room above a feed store and begun part-time work at a small livestock property. The landlord did not allow 3 large dogs. Her injured leg still made long days difficult. "I didn't come to take them," she said. Reed's relief arrived too quickly, followed by shame. Marla noticed both. "I wanted to know whether they remembered me." Tuck sat against her boot. "They do," Reed said. Marla looked at Maisie leaning against his chair, at Kepler watching Elise's orange lead hanging near the door, and at the 3 wooden beds Reed had once described as temporary. "They remember you too." That evening, after Marla left, Reed found Tuck sleeping beneath the telegraph desk, with his nose resting on the old red-brown lid she had brought. The dog had not chosen one life and rejected another. He had simply made room for both. Reed looked toward the eastern hallway, where the locked room held Avery's old cards and everything he had refused to examine. He understood the lesson. Understanding it did not yet mean he knew how to follow it. Chapter 4. The Fault of the One Who Remained. The first full-scale exercise began under a sky so clear it made the danger difficult to believe. Sunlight flashed across Larkspur Basin, turning the new snow almost blue where the shadows of the pines stretched over it. Wind moved steadily along the upper grade, lifting loose powder into thin white ribbons that crossed the abandoned rails and vanished. Dana Creel had divided 20 adult volunteers among 4 checkpoints. Each team carried a radio, a hand-cranked signal unit, emergency blankets, and a printed card listing exactly what to do if communication failed. No improvising, no changing routes without approval, no one leaving a checkpoint alone. Dana repeated the rules at the morning briefing, while Owen handed out numbered vests and complained that the reflective material made everyone look like unusually responsible traffic cones. The joke earned a few smiles. Reed did not join them. He stood near the map board in his rust-brown railway coat, tracing the old western spur with one finger. His official assignment was limited: explain discontinued routes, identify former maintenance access points, and answer questions when Dana asked. Nothing in the plan gave him authority over the teams. The limitation had been written in bold. Avery stood across the table reviewing elevation data with Noah. She wore her slate blue field jacket and had tied her hair low against the wind. Since Marla's visit, she and Reed had managed 3 consecutive days without a direct argument. They had also managed 3 consecutive days without discussing anything that mattered outside the trial. Elise waited near the platform with Kepler on the orange lead. The dog's right ear tipped outward as he watched volunteers move across the snow. Tuck remained beside Avery, assigned only to observe the exercise from the station perimeter. Maisie stayed close to Reed, her green collar visible against the warm gold of her coat. "This is a communications drill," Dana reminded everyone. "If something goes wrong, the drill ends and the incident begins. You wait for instructions." Her eyes rested on Reed for half a second longer than on anyone else. He noticed. At 9, the teams moved out. One of the volunteers was Dolores Wynn, 67, a retired postal supervisor who had spent more winters in Larkspur Basin than most of the emergency coordinators had been alive. She was short and solid, with iron gray hair braided beneath a purple cap and the habit of checking every buckle twice. Dolores had been assigned to checkpoint 3 near a line of old marker poles at the edge of the western woods. Her task was simple: confirm the poles remained visible, test the radio from beneath the tree cover, and return to the main route within 40 minutes. At 10, she reported weak reception. At 10:15, her radio transmitted static. At 10:30, she missed the scheduled check-in. Dana waited through the 5-minute confirmation window, then ended the exercise. The change in her voice was small but immediate. Checkpoint 3 is now an active accountability issue. All other teams hold position. Owen began verifying names. Noah marked Dolores's last confirmed location. Avery pulled up the terrain model. Elise brought Kepler into the station and replaced his regular lead with a longer tracking line. Dolores had left one glove in the staging room. Dana sealed it in a clean bag and handed it to Elise. Reed watched every step. The marker poles stood near an old drainage channel that curved below the official trail. In Reed's memory, the easiest route back from that section cut diagonally across the western slope and joined a maintenance spur near a buried culvert. He pointed to the map. She may have taken the lower cut to avoid the wind. Avery enlarged the terrain image. That section wasn't cleared for the exercise. She wouldn't know the boundary if the flagging blew down. The flagging is still visible. You can't see the tree line from that image. Donna lifted a hand. "Reed, note the possibility. Elise starts from the last confirmed position. Snow assessment goes ahead of the dog team." It was the correct order. Reed knew that. Kepler caught Dolores's scent quickly at the checkpoint. He moved with his nose low, following a shallow line toward the trees. Elise kept the tracking line loose and let him work. For the first 100 yards, the dog stayed inside the approved search area. Then he turned sharply downhill. Reed saw the direction and felt recognition arrive before evidence. The lower drainage. Dolores had chosen the old shortcut. He stepped forward. Dana's snow technician was still probing the slope ahead. "Hold," Dana said. Kepler pulled again. Reed looked at the wind-scoured surface. It appeared firm. The drainage channel lay less than 200 yards away. If Dolores had fallen or lost her radio there, every minute mattered. "She went toward the culvert," he said. "We don't know that," Elise answered. "Kepler does. He has an indication, not a conclusion." The dog strained toward the lower slope. Reed heard Philip's old voice in memory, patient and irritated. "You're deciding before the mountain answers." He mistook the memory for permission. Reed took the tracking line several feet behind Elise and stepped past the marker Dana had set. "Reed, stop." He continued toward the drainage. Kepler followed the pressure on the line. Tuck broke away from Avery before she could catch his harness. The smaller dog raced after Reed, his tan front paws striking through the crusted snow. Everything happened without the drama Reed would later assign to it. No thunder, no great collapse, only a muted crack beneath Tuck's weight. A thin plate of snow gave way under his front legs, revealing a narrow channel of frozen water and the dark curve of an old metal pipe. Tuck scrambled backward as one paw slipped into the opening. The sound of his claws against the pipe rang beneath the snow. He froze, his body lowered, his left ear tipped forward. Breath came fast through his nose. Reed reached toward him. "Elise," Dana ordered. Elise dropped to one knee at the safe marker and called Tuck in a low, steady voice. "Tuck, back." The dog looked at Reed. For one suspended second, Reed expected him to come forward. Tuck did not. He turned away from Reed and moved toward Elise. She guided him across the stable section, checked each leg, and held him against her side until his breathing slowed. No injury. Only fear and a shallow scrape against one boot. Dana ordered the lower rote closed. Reed stood beyond the marker with Kepler's line still in his hand. Elise took it from him. There was no anger in the gesture. That made it worse. A radio call came from the Eastern team less than 10 minutes later. Dolores had been found inside a maintenance hut above the official trail. Her radio battery had failed. When the wind strengthened, she had followed the marker poles uphill and taken shelter rather than continue alone. She was cold, embarrassed, and entirely safe. The glove scent Kepler had followed downhill came from the morning setup, when Dolores had helped Owen carry equipment near the drainage road. Kepler had not failed. He had followed the scent Reed had chosen to believe. Dana suspended Reed from the rest of the field operation before Dolores returned to the station. "You leave the site," Dana told him. "I know the terrain." "You knew the boundary." The snow held. It did not hold under Tuck. Reed looked toward Elise, who was examining the dog's front paws again. "No one was hurt." Dana's expression did not change. "That is an outcome. It is not a defense." The review began that afternoon in the municipal meeting room. Volunteers had already gone home, but word traveled quickly in a town the size of Larkspur Basin. Several people lingered near the entrance, pretending to read notices while waiting to learn what had happened. Reed wanted the full room. Part of him believed a public audience would force everyone to recognize that he had been trying to help. Dana refused. The formal discussion included only Reed, Avery, Noah, Owen, Elise, and Dana. Maisie lay beneath Reed's chair because Corinne had insisted he not attend without her. The first 20 minutes stayed technical. Dana listed the violated instructions. Noah documented the unassessed terrain. Elise explained that Kepler's behavior had been interpreted beyond what the dog had actually communicated. Reed responded to each point. He knew the drainage. Dolores had been overdue. The surface appeared stable. The shortcut had been used for decades. Avery sat at the far end of the table, saying nothing, until Reed described his judgment as more reliable than a temporary boundary placed by people who did not know the mountain. Then she leaned forward. Experience does not become safer because it is old. Reed turned toward her. No, it becomes useful. Only when someone can question it. You think a digital map knows that slope better than I do? I think a map can be checked. You keep treating your instincts as if questioning them is a personal insult. My instincts have brought people home. And today they sent a dog onto snow no one had cleared. The room went quiet. Reed felt his pulse shift. Maisie rose immediately and touched her nose to his right hand. He pulled the hand away. Avery continued, her voice controlled but no longer distant. You didn't wait because you decided waiting meant weakness. You made the answer first and used Kepler to prove it. That isn't what happened. Maisie touched him again, then pressed her body against his knee. Reed's chest tightened, not sharply, a familiar pressure accompanied by the sensation of one heartbeat arriving too early and the next searching for its place. He reached for the table. Maisie caught the small alert cord clipped to his jacket and pulled. The battery alarm sounded once. Everyone looked at him. Humiliation rose faster than fear. I'm fine. Elise checked the monitor on his wrist. You are not steady. I said I'm fine. Avery stood but did not approach. She had learned long ago that moving toward him when he felt cornered only made him retreat further. Dinah pointed to the chair Reed was already sitting in. No one is taking anything from you by making you remain there. The sentence entered more deeply than Dana could have known. Reed stopped arguing. His pulse settled after several minutes, but the room did not return to the original discussion. The technical review had reached the place beneath the technical language. Noah closed the official incident form. We need to address whether this was an isolated breach or part of a pattern affecting your role in the trial. Reed stared at the blank wall behind him. There were many ways to answer without lying. Pressure from the company, delayed weather information, structural reports he had not received in time. He had used those explanations for 9 years because each one was true. Truth, he had discovered, could still be arranged to hide something. The old Red Hollow accident wasn't caused by one decision, he said. No one moved. A section of the snow shelter had been flagged for repair. The company wanted the line reopened. The wind update arrived late. Philip Danner asked to delay the inspection. Avery's face lost what little color it had. Reed kept his eyes on the table. I approved the team going in. Owen lowered his thermos slowly. Elise remained still beside Tuck's empty harness. The official review listed multiple contributing failures, Reed continued. I let that become the only version I used. I said the structure failed, the forecast failed, management failed. His right thumb moved over the curved scar in his palm. All of that was true. Philip still told me we should wait, and I decided we could manage the risk. Philip had not returned from the shelter. Reed had carried the decision ever since. But carrying was not the same as naming. I left before the investigation was complete, he said. I told myself I was accepting responsibility. Mostly, I avoided hearing anyone define it. Avery looked at him then. Is that why you shut everyone out? Reed could have said yes. It would have been simpler and incomplete. No. Her expression tightened. Helen got sick years later, Reed said. You came back. You handled appointments, meals, insurance calls. You stayed when I wasn't much use to either of you." Avery's jaw shifted. "After the funeral, you told me you wanted me to leave the station for a while. I thought you were trying to clear the house, sell it, decide what happened to everything. I was trying to keep you alive." The words came out harder than she intended. No one interrupted. Avery looked down at her hands. "You weren't sleeping. You missed your medication. You stood outside in freezing weather because you said the building sounded wrong. I asked you to stay with me for a month." Reed remembered the kitchen. Avery holding a folder of property documents because she had been organizing Helen's accounts. His own voice, cold with exhaustion, accusing her of waiting for the house. "You said I had come home to inventory what was left," Avery continued. "I had spent 7 months watching my mother disappear one day at a time." Her voice did not break. It became quieter. "You looked at me and saw someone taking things." Reed had no defense that was not another form of injury. "That was wrong," he said. Avery waited. He understood that she was not waiting for explanation. "It was untrue," he added. "You stayed. I made staying feel like theft." The apology did not repair anything in the room. It did not need to. Dana reopened the incident form. Reed agreed that his field privileges should be suspended. He accepted a permanent restriction. No command authority, no unsupervised deployment, and no change to an approved route unless Dana requested his input. Noah asked whether Reed would permit his role in the earlier accident to be included in the trial's historical risk record. Reed said yes. When the meeting ended, no one congratulated him for honesty. Owen gathered the empty cups. Elise took Maisie's alert cord and adjusted the clip so it would be easier for the dog to reach. Dana left Reed's suspension notice on the table. Avery remained near the door. Reed expected her to say something about forgiveness, or perhaps nothing at all. Instead, she picked up his medication pouch, which had fallen beside the chair, and set it in front of him. "You missed the morning dose," she said. Reed looked at the label. She was right. "I'll take it now." Avery nodded once. It was not reconciliation. It was a fact both of them were finally willing to acknowledge. Chapter 5. The Road Beneath the Bright Snow. By the final week of March, winter had learned how to disguise itself. The mornings opened beneath polished blue skies. Sunlight warmed the southern walls of Red Hollow Station and sent clear drops falling from the eaves. By afternoon, the surface of the snow softened enough to hold boot prints. Then night came. Temperatures dropped below freezing, and the same surface hardened into a smooth white shell. People in Larkspur Basin began leaving gloves in their trucks and opening curtains before breakfast. Miriam Galt told them not to trust any of it. She delivered the warning over the community radio at 7 each morning, her voice calm and textured by decades spent explaining weather to people who preferred certainty. "Clear skies are not a promise," she said. "Warm days are adding water to the upper layers. Cold nights are sealing that instability beneath a hard crust." At 69, Miriam wore her white curls loose around a pair of large headphones and kept 3 sharpened pencils beside the weather console. She had once worked mountain forecasting for the state. Retirement had reduced her equipment, but not her authority. "The eastern face above Red Hollow remains sensitive," she continued. "Travel only on approved routes." Reed heard the broadcast while replacing a relay contact inside the station office. He no longer held command privileges in the trial, but Dana had allowed him to continue as a technical advisor. Every task now arrived in writing. Every change required another person's approval. The restrictions irritated him less than he expected. They also followed him everywhere. A red card hung beside the signal board. Report. Verify. Wait for assignment. Owen claimed the card had been Dana's idea. Dana claimed Owen had chosen the red paper because he believed Reed ignored white notices. Both explanations were probably true. Maisie slept beneath the workbench. Kepler watched two ravens argue over something near the fence. Tuck lay inside a wide plastic training tunnel Elise had left in the corner, only his tan front paws visible beyond the opening. At 10:17, the state highway closed south of Larkspur Basin after a freight truck overturned on an icy curve. No one was seriously injured, but the vehicle blocked both lanes, and recovery crews estimated several hours before the road could reopen. A 12-seat shuttle had already left North Pine Lodge. Its passengers were 11 adults returning from a winter first aid certification course. Most worked at small hotels, ranches, or outdoor businesses scattered through the valley. The driver, Mina Calder, had spent 23 years transporting people through mountain weather and had no interest in proving herself against it. Mina was 56, broad through the shoulders, with close-cut dark hair touched by silver, and a face that remained composed, even when the passengers behind her did not. She kept spare wool socks, 2 thermoses, and laminated route cards beneath her seat. When County Dispatch advised her to use the Red Hollow Service Road, she asked for the authorization number twice. The road had been inspected that morning. Only small vehicles were permitted. The eastern section remained open as a temporary emergency detour under the 30-day trial. Mina followed the approved route. At 10:46, the shuttle passed Checkpoint 2. At 10:53, its location beacon stopped moving. The snow released from the slope without the roar people expected from films and old stories. Mina first noticed a gray-white movement above the trees. Then loose snow crossed the road ahead of the shuttle in a fast, low wave. She braked, keeping the wheels straight. A second, smaller slide came down behind them. Neither struck the shuttle directly. The first buried the road ahead. The second pushed against the rear quarter, tilting the vehicle toward the outside edge and snapping the antenna mounted above the back window. The shuttle settled at an angle. For several seconds, the passengers waited for the mountain to continue. It did not. Mina shut off the engine and counted everyone aloud. 11 passengers, 1 driver, 1 man had twisted his ankle when a storage case shifted beneath his feet. An older woman named Ruth Bellamy relied on a portable oxygen concentrator whose battery showed less than 4 hours. Everyone else could walk, but none had clothing suitable for standing outside through the coming night. Mina examined the road through the side window. The shuttle was stable for the moment, but remaining inside carried its own risk. The downhill wheels rested near the softened road shoulder. Meltwater ran beneath the crusted snow. She took the emergency route card from beneath her seat. It showed a maintenance shelter 80 yards upslope. "Coats on," she told the passengers. "Leave luggage. Take medicine, water, and the 2 orange bags." No one argued. That helped. They moved slowly, linked by a rope from the shuttle's emergency kit. Mina went first, testing each step. The man with the injured ankle traveled between 2 stronger passengers. Ruth conserved her oxygen, breathing carefully through her nose. The shelter entrance was partially hidden behind snow-loaded brush, but the new county marker remained visible above it. Mina cleared the latch with a folding shovel. Inside, the maintenance corridor smelled of cold concrete and old iron. The structure had been inspected, but not renovated. Fresh emergency blankets, sealed water, and battery lanterns had been placed inside during the trial. The hand-cranked generator stood beneath a plastic cover beside a waterproof instruction board. Mina read every instruction before touching it. Turn the crank for 60 seconds. Select the number of occupants. Select medical assistance if required. Select blocked access. Repeat after 2 minutes. The handle resisted at first, then began to move. Far down the buried copper line, a pulse traveled toward Red Hollow Station. Reed heard the receiving board before he saw it. The newly cleaned relays clicked in sequence. 3 amber lights appeared, paused, then repeated. Group stranded, medical need, both exits blocked. He stood very still. Maisie came out from beneath the bench, but Reed's breathing had not changed. She looked at him, decided no intervention was required, and sat beside his left boot. The signal repeated. The third pulse arrived slightly late. Not enough to change the code. Enough to suggest resistance in the line. Reed leaned closer without touching the board. Moisture or ice near the eastern corridor could be slowing the current. He pictured the buried wire descending beside the service road, crossing the drainage and entering the shelter wall. A year earlier, he would already have been reaching for his coat. 4 days earlier, he might still have convinced himself that technical knowledge counted as permission. The red card beside the board moved gently in the draft. Report. Verify. Wait. Reed picked up the radio. Red Hollow to County Control. Confirming hand crank activation from the eastern corridor. Code indicates 12 occupants, at least 1 medical concern. Access blocked in both directions. Dana answered immediately. Copy, Red Hollow. Hold position and continue monitoring. There's pulse drag on the medical indicator. Likely resistance near the corridor junction. Log the interval. Do not leave the station. Reed looked through the window toward the white slope. Understood. The word cost him something. It also held. Within 15 minutes, Red Hollow became the technical side of a much larger operation. Dana established incident command at the lower service junction. Avalanche specialists reviewed temperature records, slope angle, and recent snow loading. Owen opened the community hall as a warming and logistics center. Volunteers were assigned to food, equipment tracking, and family communication, not sent toward the mountain. Miriam moved from the radio studio to a county weather trailer, bringing notebooks filled with handwritten observations. Her forecast showed wind rising after sunset and temperatures dropping sharply before midnight. Noah spread the old and revised infrastructure maps across Reed's kitchen table. Avery joined by secure radio from the county engineering vehicle and reviewed the maintenance corridor's structural inspection. Elise arrived with Kepler and Tuck. She brought both dogs because their possible roles were still being evaluated, not because either had been promised work. Maisie remained with Reed. Elise set her equipment near the door and listened while Reed explained the pulse delay. Could the corridor be flooding? She asked. Unlikely. More likely ice around the exterior junction or water in a splice box. And the signal still carries? For now. For now changed the room. The stranded group could send codes, but not speech. The corridor's radio repeater had not yet been installed. Dana knew they were alive and sheltering. She did not know the exact medical condition, whether the shuttle had shifted further, or how long Ruth's oxygen supply would last. Mina continued sending the same sequence every 5 minutes. At 12:08, she added a new code. Power limited. Reed recorded the spacing. He did not interpret beyond what the board provided. Dinah's first team approached from the western side after avalanche specialists marked a safe route. GPS data from Mina's last beacon, the generator signal, and the service road map narrowed the corridor's location to a few hundred yards. The main entrance was buried beneath dense snow pushed across the slope. The team could reach it, but excavation required careful reinforcement. Removing too much snow too quickly might disturb the layers above. Avery identified 2 ventilation shafts and 1 drainage pipe connected to the lower corridor. The shafts were too narrow for equipment delivery. The drainage line was larger, but its condition remained unknown. Dana authorized Elise to bring Kepler forward only after the snow route had been marked. Reed watched the operation through body camera feeds sent to Noah's laptop. Kepler moved beside Elise on the short orange lead. His nose worked along the snowbank while technicians checked each section with probes. Twice he stopped at animal tracks and looked toward the trees. Elise redirected him without correction or praise. At the first ventilation mound, Kepler showed no sustained interest. At the second, he circled, pressed his nose into a shallow depression, and returned to it after Elise led him away. A thermal camera registered a weak column of warmer air beneath the snow. A contact microphone picked up irregular tapping from below. Not a coded signal. Human movement. "They're under that section," Reed said. Noah looked at him. Reed corrected himself. "The readings support that section." Noah nodded and relayed the confirmation. The main entrance remained the safest eventual exit. Engineers began clearing it in narrow layers, placing supports as they worked. The drainage pipe offered a faster way to establish voice communication and send supplies. A camera was fed through from the exterior opening. The pipe measured roughly 20 inches across at its narrowest visible point, then widened slightly beyond the first bend. It ran less than 60 feet and remained mostly straight. No water moved through it. The interior surface was rough but intact. 15 feet in, a collar of ice reduced the opening. Until the ice was removed, nothing larger than the camera could pass. Tuck stood several yards away in a cobalt working harness, watching the cable disappear into the dark pipe. His posture was alert, but not rigid. The entrance itself did not frighten him. Then a metal support bar shifted beneath a technician's boot. The sound traveled down the pipe in a hollow ring. Tuck stepped backward. Elise moved between him and the opening, giving him space rather than comfort he had not requested. Reed felt an old impulse rise. He is trained for this. He can do it. People are waiting. Each thought sounded reasonable by itself. Together they formed the beginning of a command Reed no longer had the right to give. Avery entered Red Hollow over the radio. The ice collar can be reduced with low heat, but it will take time. The pipe must be inspected again afterward. Dana answered, "Continue excavation at the main entrance. The pipe remains secondary." Reed looked at Tuck's tan markings above his eyes, the small forward tilt of his left ear, and the way he watched Elise rather than the dark opening. The dog did not know 12 adults were waiting beneath the hillside. He did not understand medical codes or oxygen batteries. He knew only the sound inside the pipe, Elise's position, and the memory of training sessions that had sometimes ended with him choosing to come back. Elise crouched and placed one hand near the harness without touching it. "If the route clears," she said to Dana, "he can carry a lightweight pilot line, nothing more." "And if he refuses?" Dana asked. "Then he refuses." No one argued. The engineers began warming the ice collar from outside. The camera remained in place, showing water bead and run harmlessly toward the lower opening. At the same time, the excavation team continued strengthening the main entrance. There would be no single point of failure. No life would depend entirely on one dog entering one pipe. Reed loosened the hand he had closed around the brass signal key at his belt. For years, he had confused trust with certainty. He had believed that trusting someone meant expecting them to move when he needed them to move. Tuck stood before the pipe because Elise had prepared him carefully and because the environment was being made as safe as possible. That was all. The rest had to remain the dog's choice. When the ice finally cleared, a technician sent the camera through again. The passage was open. The interior showed no collapse, standing water or sharp obstruction. Dana authorized preparation of the pilot line. Elise clipped the line to Tuck's harness, then walked him away from the opening rather than toward it. She gave him water, checked his paws, and let him watch the team work. Reed stayed beside the signal board with Maisie at his feet. The amber lamps continued their patient sequence from beneath the mountain. 12 people waiting, 1 medical concern. Both exits blocked. Tuck returned to the mouth of the pipe and looked into the dark. No one pushed him forward. No one called him brave. And Reed, for the first time in his life, understood that a creature could be trusted without being owed. Chapter 6. No one is saved by one person. The pipe looked smaller when Tuck stood in front of it. From the camera feed, it had seemed like a simple gray passage beneath the snow, straight, dry, wide enough for a young German shepherd to move through. At ground level, the opening was a dark circle surrounded by wet ice, cables, and the boots of people trying not to crowd it. Elise Navarro knelt several feet back with the orange lead loose in one hand. She did not point toward the pipe. She did not repeat the command they had practiced at Red Hollow. Instead, she let Tuck examine the place on his own. The dog sniffed the rim, stepped forward, and listened. His 2 tan markings lifted above the black mask of his face. Somewhere inside, water tapped against metal with a small, irregular rhythm. Avery stood beside the engineering team, watching the live camera view on a tablet. The ice collar had been removed, and thermal strips confirmed that the pipe's temperature remained above the level that might quickly freeze exposed paws. Technicians had covered one metal joint with a padded sleeve to reduce the echo that had unsettled Tuck earlier. The pilot line attached to his cobalt harness weighed almost nothing. That did not make the decision weightless. Dana Creel's voice came over the radio from the incident command vehicle. "Elise, proceed only if the dog is willing." Elise pressed the transmit button. Understood. At Red Hollow Station, Reed stood before the receiving board with Maisie beside him. The body camera feed played on Noah Beckett's laptop, but Reed kept his attention on the signal lamps. The group beneath the mountain continued to transmit every 5 minutes. 12 occupants, 1 medical concern, access blocked, power limited. The pulse drag had increased slightly. Reed had written the intervals in a narrow column, each number followed by the exact time. He did not speculate aloud. Noah checked Reed's notes, then relayed the changes to Dana. The system had begun functioning without requiring Reed to dominate it. He was still learning how strange that felt. On the screen, Elise gave Tuck the familiar tunnel command. The dog entered. His shoulders disappeared first, then the black saddle of his back and the cobalt harness. The thin pilot line slipped smoothly from its reel. 5 feet. 8. Tuck slowed. The sound of his nails traveled back through the pipe, sharper than it had during training. He stopped. Elise lowered herself until she was nearly level with the opening. "Tuck," she said quietly. "Back." No one behind her moved. The dog remained inside for several seconds. The line trembled once, then began returning toward the reel. Tuck backed out of the pipe and turned immediately toward Elise. His body was low, ears uneven, breath quick but controlled. Elise placed one hand beneath his chest and checked each paw. she found no injury. A technician looked toward Dinah's vehicle. "We could try guiding him through with audio." "No," Elise said. The technician fell silent. Tuck had obeyed the return command. That was not failure. It was exactly what he had been trained to do when the environment no longer felt manageable. Elise walked him away from the pipe. She gave him water and allowed him to lie on a foam pad beside Kepler. No one gathered around to praise or comfort him. Tuck needed quiet more than celebration. The technical crew returned to the opening. A second camera inspection revealed that the heating process had loosened a narrow metal strap farther inside. It was not blocking the route, but water striking it produced the sharp sound Tuck had heard. Avery proposed securing it with an expandable foam sleeve carried in on the camera cable. Dana approved. While the team worked, excavation continued at the main shelter entrance. Support panels were inserted into the narrow trench. Snow was removed in measured sections and transported away from the slope instead of piled beside the opening. No one waited for Tuck to become heroic. The rescue continued without him. Inside the corridor, Mina Calder listened to the fading scrape from the pipe. She had seen the camera lens appear earlier and understood that the outside team was working toward them. The passengers sat wrapped in silver emergency blankets along the concrete wall. Ruth Bellamy's oxygen unit rested beside her, its battery indicator falling 1 bar at a time. The man with the injured ankle, Gordon Pike, had stopped trying to joke about it. Swelling had tightened his boot, and Mina loosened the laces without removing it. One of the other passengers asked whether they should turn the generator again. "Not until the scheduled interval," Mina said. The instruction board warned against unnecessary use. The generator's internal storage cell was old, and the group needed to preserve enough charge to keep sending signals. Mina looked toward the drainage pipe. She could not see Tuck from where she sat. She did not know a dog had entered and turned back. All she knew was that someone outside had found them, and finding was not yet the same as reaching. 40 minutes later, the metal strap inside the pipe had been secured. The camera passed through twice without producing the same echo. Elise walked Tuck back toward the opening. She did not clip the pilot line immediately. The dog approached, sniffed the padded rim, and looked inside. His breathing remained even. When a technician shifted nearby, Tuck glanced back but did not retreat. Elise fastened the line to his harness. "Tunnel." Tuck stepped forward. This time he moved slowly but continuously. His nails made a softer sound over the covered joint. The pilot line unrolled behind him in a narrow blue curve. 10 feet. 20. Avery watched the tracking marker advance across the tablet. At the halfway point, Tuck paused. Reed saw the pause on the screen and felt his hand tighten around the edge of the signal desk. He said nothing. Elise said nothing. The dog lifted his nose, catching air from the occupied corridor. Then he continued. The camera inside the shelter showed a dark shape emerging from the far opening. Mina lowered herself carefully. "Easy," she said, though she had never met him. Tuck crawled into the corridor, stood and shook once. The passengers stared at him with the stunned attention people gave to any ordinary creature arriving from an impossible direction. Mina checked the harness card. "Tuck, pilot line attached. Do not remove harness. Connect red loop to supply line." She followed the instructions. A red loop on the pilot line was clipped to a stronger cord. The outside team pulled it back through the pipe, followed by a compact radio. Medication support requested by the medical team, heating packs, and a protected communications cable. Mina turned on the radio. "Eastern Corridor to Incident Command. Do you copy?" Dana answered at once. We copy you clearly. Several passengers released breaths they had been holding for hours. Mina gave the medical report in exact order. Ruth's remaining oxygen capacity, Gordon's ankle, the stable condition of the others, and the corridor temperature. Tuck remained beside her until Dana confirmed the connection was secure. Then Mina attached the return line as instructed and guided him toward the pipe. He hesitated at the opening. Mina touched the back of his harness, not pushing, only steadying it. Your people are that way. Tuck entered and returned to Elise. His work ended there. Elise removed the harness, wrapped him in a dry blanket, and handed him to an animal support volunteer. Tuck was given water, food, and a quiet crate inside a heated vehicle. He did not pull supplies. He did not lead anyone through the pipe. He had carried one light line across a safe, inspected passage. That had been enough to change the operation. Kepler continued working with Elise's assistant along the upper route. He checked 2 additional ventilation points and helped confirm that no warm airflow was escaping through a section the engineers planned to cross. Every indication was tested with probes and thermal equipment before the team advanced. At Red Hollow, the operation stretched into late afternoon. The pulse signals stopped once the radio link was established, but Reed remained at the board to monitor the line in case the new communication failed. Maisie stood and touched her nose to his wrist. Reed looked at the clock. He had been in the same position for nearly 4 hours. I'm sitting, he told her. Maisie pushed against his knee. Noah glanced over from the map table. She does not appear impressed by your argument. Reed shifted his weight. A pressure had begun beneath his breastbone, not severe but familiar. His heartbeat stumbled, corrected, then stumbled again. On the command radio, Avery's voice reported that the excavation team had reached the outer frame of the shelter door. Reed leaned toward the receiver. Maisie stepped directly between him and the board. Move. She did not. He tried to step around her. Maisie caught the alert cord on his jacket and pulled. The alarm sounded. Reed reached to silence it. Then Maisie lay across both of his boots. For a moment, irritation nearly won. Avery was still beneath an unstable slope. The shelter door had not yet opened. Noah did not know the old board as well as he did. Every reason to remain sounded responsible. That was what made them dangerous. Reed pressed the radio key. Red Hollow to command, Donna responded. Go ahead. I'm experiencing an irregular rhythm and chest pressure. I need to transfer station monitoring. The room did not stop. Noah simply moved to the board and took Reed's notebook. Transfer acknowledged, Dana said. Medical support is coming to Red Hollow. Noah has the station. Reed looked at the rows of times and pulse intervals. Noah understood them. The board remained lit. The rescue did not collapse because Reed stepped away. An emergency medical technician named Farah Lynn arrived from the lower command point. She was a small, brisk woman with a black braid tucked inside her jacket and the unhurried manner of someone who knew panic rarely improved a measurement. She checked Reed's monitor, asked direct questions, and guided him toward the cot in the station's side room. Maisie followed, placing one paw across the toe of his boot once he sat down. You trained her well, Farah said. Elise trained her. Then you listened well. Eventually. Through the radio, Avery reported that the shelter door had been stabilized. The passengers would come out one at a time. Ruth exited first, secured to a safety line, and accompanied by 2 medical responders. Her portable oxygen unit remained connected until she reached the heated vehicle. Gordon followed with his ankle supported and his arms around 2 rescuers. He walked most of the distance himself. The remaining passengers came out in small groups, clipped to the fixed line, and guided along the marked path. Mina left last after checking the shelter twice. No one was carried through blowing snow beneath dramatic lights. The wind had not yet risen. The sky remained deceptively bright. The work was methodical, slow, and almost quiet. That was why everyone came home. By dusk, the corridor stood empty. All 12 people were accounted for. None of the dogs had been injured. Ruth required hospital observation, and Gordon's ankle would need imaging, but the medical team expected both to recover. Dana ended the incident only after checking every name herself. 2 days later, NOAA issued an urgent structural notice for the last intact signal tower above Red Hollow. The tower's foundation had shifted during the warm-cold cycle. Repair would cost more than replacement and could not guarantee stability. Reed read the report twice. The tower had stood during his entire railway career. Philip had once climbed it in freezing rain to replace a lens while Reed shouted advice from below. Helen could see its upper platform from the kitchen window. A year earlier, Reed would have argued that the tower represented continuity. Now he understood it had become unsafe. He signed the removal approval. Avery joined him on the station platform when the crew lowered it. Cables tightened. The old frame leaned slowly away from the mountain, descended and settled onto wooden supports without ceremony. Reed watched the empty space it left behind. "It looks wrong," Avery said. "It does. Do you regret signing?" Reed considered the question. No. That evening, the temporary medical room smelled of coffee, antiseptic wipes, and damp wool. Reed sat on the edge of the cot while Maisie slept beneath it. Avery entered carrying 2 paper cups. She handed one to him and sat in the folding chair beside the wall. Neither spoke about forgiveness. The word was too large and too clean for what stood between them. Avery looked at the medication pouch beside Reed's hand. "Did you take the evening dose?" "Yes." She studied his face. Reed met her eyes. "At 6:10, he added. "Farah watched me." Avery nodded and drank her coffee. Outside, crews packed equipment into trucks. Kepler barked once near Elise's vehicle. Somewhere farther down the road, Tuck answered from his heated crate. The mountain had not been defeated. The past had not been repaired. 12 people had come home because Mina followed instructions. Miriam read the weather. Dana controlled the operation. Avery trusted the engineers. Elise listened to Tuck. Noah read Reed's notes, and Reed finally admitted when he could no longer continue. No one had saved them alone. For the first time, Reed did not hear that as an accusation. Chapter 7. 3 homes and 1 shared signal. The state kept Red Hollow, but not the railroad Reed remembered. By early summer, the last unstable towers had been removed from the slopes. Crews preserved only what could serve a clear purpose. 3 hand-cranked generators, 2 maintenance shelters, the buried communication line between them, and the receiving board inside Red Hollow Station. Everything else was photographed, cataloged, and either stored or dismantled. Reed attended each review meeting without arguing that age alone made something valuable. Some decisions still bothered him. The state replaced 2 original relay housings with weatherproof modern boxes that looked too clean against the old concrete walls. A section of copper line Reed believed could have been repaired was abandoned in favor of a shorter route. He wrote his objections in the margins. Then he accepted the final decision. The program that emerged was called Winter Link. Owen had proposed several grander names, including Mountain Beacon Network and Red Hollow Lifeline. Dana rejected both before he finished presenting the logos. Winterlink was plain enough to describe what it did. It was not a volunteer rescue team. Dana repeated that distinction at every training session. Residents learned to test radios, inspect stored blankets, check on people living alone, and report road conditions through approved channels. They could transport food or medication when the county authorized it. They could operate the hand generators and read the simplified signal codes. They could not enter avalanche terrain, begin independent searches, or decide that courage excused procedure. Reed taught the history of the line and the practical details that had never survived on official diagrams. He showed volunteers how cold affected old contacts, how to listen for uneven resistance in a generator handle, and why a signal should always be repeated before anyone interpreted it. He taught them which service paths disappeared first beneath drifting snow and where sound carried strangely between the ridges. His title was Technical Advisor. There was no word resembling chief, supervisor, or commander. At first, Reed corrected every hand position himself. If someone cranked too quickly, he stepped in. If a volunteer misread a pulse, he reached for the card before they could try again. Dana eventually placed a wooden chair behind him during training. "What is that for?" he asked. "For you. I teach standing. You interrupt standing. Sit down and let them learn." He sat. The first volunteer sent the wrong signal twice and corrected it on the third attempt, without Reed touching the machine. Nothing broke. That became a useful experience. Avery returned to Red Hollow most Saturdays. Sometimes she arrived before breakfast with rolled maps beneath one arm and Kepler's training lead looped over the other. Sometimes she came late, tired from the drive, and unwilling to explain the week she had just finished. Reed stopped treating every visit as an event that required perfect conditions. They worked. They replaced battery packs, checked weather seals, and updated the map of the Eastern Corridor. They walked the grade with Elise and the dogs. They argued about labels, budgets, cable depth, and whether Owen's supply inventory required 3 separate categories for coffee. Their relationship did not improve in a straight line. One Saturday, Reed dismissed a structural note Avery had written as overly cautious. She packed her tablet and left before lunch. A month earlier, he would have watched her drive away and told himself she needed space. This time, he called before she reached the highway. "I'm not ready to agree with your report," he said. "That is not the problem." "I know." Silence came through the phone. Reed stood beside the station door with Maisie watching him. "I need an hour before I can discuss it without making it personal." Avery exhaled. That would have been useful information 20 minutes ago. "Yes." She returned the next morning. They still disagreed about the report. They did not lose another month to it. Maisie remained at Red Hollow. Under Elise's guidance, she completed a formal assistance training plan focused on Reed's established symptoms. She learned to interrupt certain behaviors, guide him toward a chair, activate an alert cord, and remain beside him while help was contacted. Corinne refused to let anyone describe the dog as a cure. "She is an early warning system with fur," the veterinarian said during one review. "Your medication remains medication. Your monitor remains a monitor. Your cardiologist remains the person with the medical degree." Reed looked at Maisie. Maisie placed one tan paw on his boot. "She also has opinions," he said. "Those are not clinically regulated." Kepler moved into Elise's home at the edge of the county training grounds. The decision was not treated as an adoption ceremony or a reward for his work during the rescue. Elise believed he had the temperament to continue scent training, provided everyone accepted that potential did not guarantee certification. Avery attended whenever her schedule allowed. Kepler trusted her, but he worked for Elise. The distinction remained important. During one autumn exercise, Kepler abandoned a search line after catching the scent of elk near the tree line. Avery expected Elise to show frustration. Instead, Elise shortened the task, reset the scent article, and gave the dog a chance to return to the correct work. "He still does that," Avery said. "He may always notice wildlife," Elise answered. "Training does not remove who he is. It teaches him what to do next." Kepler found the correct target on the second attempt. Avery carried that sentence back to Red Hollow without telling Reed where she had heard it. Tuck's future required the most time. Marla Quinn had found steady work at a small ranch west of the basin, where she lived in a converted foreman's cottage with a fenced yard and a heated utility room. Her leg had improved, though cold mornings still made her steps uneven. Corinne inspected the property. Elise evaluated the fencing and routine. Reed participated in every discussion, but did not make the decision alone. Tuck began with afternoon visits. Reed drove him to Marla's cottage, stayed through the first hour, and returned with him before dark. Later, Tuck remained for an entire day. Then one night. Each time Reed arrived to collect him, Tuck greeted him warmly. Each time Reed brought him back, Tuck greeted Marla the same way. The dog did not appear confused by loving two places. Reed was the one who struggled with the arrangement. During the third overnight visit, he woke before dawn and looked automatically beneath the telegraph desk. The empty space there felt larger than it was. Maisie slept near his bed. Kepler's wooden platform remained against the wall, even though Elise had moved his blankets weeks earlier. Reed had not yet decided what to do with either empty bed. He went downstairs, made coffee, and began sanding a section of damaged shelving. At 7, Marla called. Reed answered before the second ring. "Is he all right?" "He's asleep." "Why are you calling?" Marla paused. "Because you asked me to call in the morning." Reed looked at the clock. "That's right. You can pick him up after lunch." He almost said he would come immediately. Instead, he asked how Tuck had managed the night. "He checked the doors twice," Marla said. "Then he slept beside my boots." Reed closed his eyes. The image hurt because it was good. 2 weeks later, the transition became permanent. Marla arrived at Red Hollow in her rust-red coat, carrying the repaired brown lead from the night the dogs had been lost. Reed had packed Tuck's food, medical records, blanket, and the cobalt harness he no longer needed for regular use. Tuck seemed to understand that the visit was different. He moved between the truck and the station, checking both. Reed sat on the front step. The dog approached and placed his head on Reed's knee. His tan markings made him look solemn, though one ear tilted forward at the sound of Marla closing the tailgate. Reed ran one hand along Tuck's neck. "You don't have to guard everyone," he said. Tuck leaned harder against him. Reed did not promise to visit every day. He did not say the dog would always belong to Red Hollow. He helped Marla clip on the old lead. When Tuck climbed into her truck, Reed closed the door himself. The pain did not mean the decision was wrong. That was another lesson he had spent most of his life resisting. The following winter arrived gently. Snow covered Larkspur Basin in clean, shallow layers, bright beneath a wide December sky. Winterlink scheduled its first complete system check before the heavier storms arrived. Reed and Maisie remained at Red Hollow. Avery joined Elise and Kepler at North Relay. Marla and Tuck staffed the western shelter near her ranch. Owen coordinated logistics from the community hall. Miriam monitored the weather channel, and Dana supervised the exercise from county control. Every person had an assignment. Every station had a backup. At precisely 10, the northern generator sent the first test. The receiving board clicked. 2 amber flashes appeared. Route checked. No hazard. Reed recorded the time but did not touch the radio. The protocol required him to wait for the second station. Minutes later, the western signal traveled through the repaired line. 2 more flashes, route checked, no hazard. Maisie stood beside him, watching the lamps fade. Reed placed one hand on her back, then moved to Red Hollow's generator. He turned the handle at the measured pace he had taught the volunteers. His response crossed the basin. All stations received. System clear. There was no emergency hidden inside the message. No one was lost. No one needed Reed to make a decision before the mountain answered. The silence afterward felt different from the silence that had once occupied the station. It was not emptiness. It was a completed check. Through the front window, Reed saw movement along the northern grade. Avery and Elise were walking toward the station with Kepler moving between them. The dog ran several steps ahead, then turned to confirm they were following. A vehicle appeared on the western road. Tuck sat upright beside Marla, his dark face framed by the passenger window. The dogs no longer slept beneath one roof. Their beds were in 3 different homes. Their mornings followed different voices. Their work, habits, and loyalties had grown beyond the night Reed carried them out of the maintenance car. Still, all 3 roads led back to Red Hollow. Maisie pressed against Reed's leg. He once believed a home was something a person protected by keeping it unchanged. A building, a chair, a locked room, a version of the past no one was permitted to rearrange. Now Red Hollow contained new wiring, missing towers and maps corrected in Avery's handwriting. Kepler's bed stood empty. Tuck's place beneath the desk had become a storage space for Winterlink radios. Nothing had remained as it was. The place had become more of a home, not less. Reed opened the station door. Cold, clean air entered the room. Avery raised one hand from the distant track. Marla's truck turned into the yard. Kepler pulled forward with bright impatience, while Tuck's tail struck the seat behind the glass. Reed did not stand in the doorway waiting for everyone to come to him. With Maisie beside him, he stepped into the snow and walked toward them. Sometimes the bravest thing is not taking control, but knowing when to step back, tell the truth, and trust others to carry their part. Reed learned that love does not mean holding on to everything. It means making room for people to return, for animals to find the home that is right for them, and for help to arrive through many willing hands. In our own lives, we may not face a mountain storm, but we all face moments when pride tells us to handle everything alone. May we have the wisdom to ask for help, the courage to release what we cannot keep, and the grace to walk toward one another again. Share in the comments what this story meant to you, and subscribe for more stories about loyalty, healing, and second chances. May God guide your steps and bring peaceful people into your path.